Okay, now the next section is going to be another teaching section. Jesus is going to give another discourse on teaching there in Matthew 18. And the overall theme of this section of teaching is about humility. And a lot of what is going to be talked about here is going to be covering going to be examining the attitudes and how to live out the attitudes as expressed in the Beatitudes at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. So we're going to be talking about the sorts of things that one does when one has a proper attitude as enumerated by Jesus at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5. We'll go back and look at that as we go. But there's going to be a common theme here in this section. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked. So I guess this is when they're in Capernaum and Jesus just paid the temple tax, I guess. I don't know. Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? He called a little child and had him stand among them, and he said, I tell you the truth. Unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Some manuscripts add, the Son of Man came to seek and save what was lost. Actually, excuse me, that's from a verse further on down. That's not for that verse. Sorry about that. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So we're not now. Before we go any further, let's go back to the Sermon on the Mount. Okay. When he says humbles himself like a child, it doesn't mean become childlike in innocence or in intelligence, but humble yourself. And let's go back to the Sermon on the Mount, the beginning, Matthew chapter 5, the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. This goes back to poor in spirit, those who do not think too highly of themselves, those who have a proper view of their debt toward God. Those who mourn over their sin, those who reject it and struggle with it. Those who are meek, the humble, those who do not have pride. Hunger and thirst for righteousness, merciful, pure in heart, peacemakers. That's who we're talking about here. Okay, unless you become like a little child, unless you humble yourself like a little child, you will be greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And now, he's talking about an actual child there. He had a child standing in front of them. But now he's going to switch and talk about his disciples, as children. Okay, so he was talking about an actual literal child who is standing in their midst. But now he's going to be using that to refer to his followers as children. So from what he says from now on in this chapter, even if he still uses the same word child there, he's going to be talking about his disciples, even those who are technically adults. And whoever welcomes a little child like this in my name welcomes me. But if anyone causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, he's not talking just about literal children here. He's talking about any of his followers, any of his disciples, who believe in me to sin. It would be better for him to have a large millstone hung around his neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. Woe to the world because of the things that cause people to sin. Such things must come, but woe to the man through whom they come. So don't be that guy. Don't be the guy who brings sin into the group. Achan did that back in Joshua when they raided Jericho and he took some of the things that were forbidden. Don't be the guy who introduces sin into the camp. If your hand or your foot causes you to sin, we've read this before, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life maimed or crippled than to have 2 hands or 2 feet and be thrown into Gehenna fire. That's the fire burning outside Jerusalem where they threw out their trash. We talked about that before. And if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and to be thrown into the Gehenna of fire. See that you do not look down on one of these little ones. That's his disciples now, not just little children, but his disciples. For I tell you that their angels in heaven always see the face of my Father in heaven. And that doesn't mean that kids have guardian angels and that they somehow lose them as they get older. These little ones he's talking about there are his disciples in general, from any age, whether they're 6 years old or 106 years old. I don't know what a guardian angel is. This seems to be the verse that most clearly teaches a concept like that. People talk about guardian angels. This seems to be the verse that most clearly teaches a concept like that, but I don't quite know what that means. What do you think? And that is where it says the Son of Man came to save what was lost in some manuscripts. What do you think? If a man owns 100 sheep, and one of them wanders away, will he not leave the 99 on the hills and go to look for the one that has wandered off? And now he's talking here in the context of his little ones, one who wanders away. So he's talking about a member of the group, a member of the church, a disciple who wanders off, who gets led astray. And if he finds it, I tell you the truth, he is happier about that one sheep than about the 99 that did not wander off. In the same way, your Father in heaven is not willing that any of these little ones should be lost. Now again, he's not talking about actual children here. He's talking about his disciples. So this applies to those who are already in the congregation, who are already in the group, who are already his little ones, who are already his disciples. If your brother sins against you, or if your brother sins, go and show him his faults, just between the two of you, in private, between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have won your brother. But if he will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. This, of course, goes back to the law, which required multiple witnesses in order to establish a capital offense. Deuteronomy 19:15. One witness is not enough to convict a man accused of any crime or offense he may have committed. A matter must be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, really multiple witnesses, and they have to be independent, and they have to be, as it goes on to say right after that, they have to be genuine. Because it goes on to talk about what happens if a man gives false testimony, and giving false testimony was explicitly one of the 10 Commandments that you're not supposed to do. So we're talking about multiple genuine witnesses acting independently and corroborating each other's account of the fault to ensure that someone doesn't come along and just make up something about somebody and get someone condemned for something that the person just made up. So if you're having trouble, now this is referring to those who are in the group. This is referring to the disciples. This is referring to those who are in the congregation, not those outside. If your brother sins, whether against you or even just sins in general, go and show him his fault, just between the two of you, between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have won your brother over. But if he will not listen, take 1 or 2 others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. This goes back to peacemakers. Okay? This is what you do. This is how you act if you're a peacemaker. Beatitudes, Matthew 5, verse 9. Blessed are the peacemakers, they will be sons of God. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. That's the congregation, the assembly. And if he refuses to listen even to the entire assembly, treat him as you would a pagan or a taskmaster. In other words, cut him off, kick him out. Paul will say this too in 1 Corinthians and in other places about certain individuals who are causing trouble. There's an individual in 1 Corinthians that is causing trouble in the Corinthian church. He says to kick him, cast him out. There's a couple of people in one of the Timothy, I think 1 Timothy, he mentions a couple of guys who are blaspheming, and he's cast them out of the congregation. So this goes back to the Israelites when they were circling around the camp of Sinai and traveling around, and one of the punishments of sin was to be cast out of the camp. So they're being cast out, they're being removed from the community. I tell you the truth. Now the idea behind this is to cause this person to repent and come back. That's the point. Now, whether or not that works really is up to the person who's being disciplined. If that person is going to repent of their wrongdoing and seek to reconcile with the others, you're supposed to. And that's what Jesus will talk about next. If he doesn't, he doesn't. Like if he goes off and stays gone, he's gone. But the idea, the point behind this kind of discipline is to induce the desire to repent in the heart of the person who's being cast out, to want to come back and be reconciled again. If he does do that, you are to forgive him. I tell you the truth, whatever you bind on earth will be bound or will have already been bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed or will have already been loosed in heaven. That means permitted. Whatever you permit on earth. And this goes back to what he said to Peter in chapter 16 when Peter confessed that he was the Christ, the Son of God. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. So it's not just Peter who has this authority, it's any of the apostles, any of the disciples. And really what they're doing is they're stating what's already been permitted or restricted in heaven. Whatever you bind will have already been bound in heaven. So whatever you restrict, in other words, whatever you permit on earth will have already been permitted in heaven. Again, I tell you that if two of you on earth agree about anything you ask for, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven. For wherever two or three come together in my name, there I am with them. And again, the context for this is reconciling a wayward brother. This is not about saying, two people can come together and pray for, like a husband and a wife can come together and pray that they'll win the lottery or something. It's not that. We're talking about two people or more coming together and praying for reconciliation with a sinning brother. That's the context here. Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother when he sins against me? Up to 7 times? So, if you have a brother who has sinned, and he has gone his own way, and you have established the matter with yourself and him and the witnesses in the congregation that he is in the wrong, and you have even if you've cast him out, let's say he comes back. Let's say at some point during the process he confesses and repents. How often do you have to forgive him in that case? Up to 7 times? Now that seems stingy, especially since we know Jesus' answer here. But in their culture at the time, the common teaching was you can forgive him 3 times. After 3 times, you don't have to forgive him anymore. So Peter is actually being pretty generous here when he says up to 7 times. But Jesus answered, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times, or 70 times 7 times. Now again, this is not to say you can forgive him 77 times and not the 78th, or 490 times and not a 491st, depending on whether it's 77 or 7 times 70 times 7. That's not the point. The point is perfection. 7 is the number of perfection. And he's saying extra perfection. Like there is no limit. Just don't keep track of how many times you forgive your brother. And he's going to give an example, a parable here to teach this. And again, this goes back to the merciful. Blessed are the merciful, for they'll be shown mercy. Those who are merciful to their brother. This goes back to the Beatitudes. Blessed are the peacemakers, those who reconcile with wayward brothers, who call them back from sin. Blessed are those who show mercy. Those who are merciful, they'll be shown mercy. Blessed are those who do not seek to hold their brother's sins against them, but will forgive them, will show mercy to them. Blessed are the humble, those who do not consider themselves proud or great. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who yearn, hunger and thirst for righteousness. All of these attitudes that we see reflected in the Sermon on the Mount are being elaborated upon here in Matthew 18. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven. So here's a parable to illustrate how often we should forgive our brother. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. So it's judgment time. It's D-Day. It's time to judge. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 talents, that would be billions of dollars, was brought to him. That would be more money than anybody could ever make in a lifetime. More money, in fact, than even existed in the world at this time. Since he was not able, I don't know how in the world a guy would get into that deep with his man. Okay, in human terms, that would never happen. An actual human servant could never possibly even get into debt this deep with his human. master because there literally wasn't that much money circulating in the world at this point in time. So it's not possible for this an actual human servant to be this deep in debt with a human master, but the point is being made that you're in deep debt to your heavenly master. So as he began the settlement, a man who owed 10,000 talents to him was brought to him. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. Of course, I would not begin to repay the debt because the debt is far greater than it could be repaid even by simply selling these people. The servant fell on his knees before him. "Be patient with me," he begged, "and I will pay back everything." Of course, he was not going to pay back everything because it wasn't possible. The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. By the way, I believe from what I've read, the term 10,000 is the highest unit, the numerical unit that can be expressed in a language at this time. So Jesus took like the most exaggerated amount of money he possibly could within the language he was speaking at this point, or at least as it's written here in these written accounts later on. Jesus may have been speaking in a language other than Greek, but from what I've read, the Greek in the Greek language at this time, 10,000 was the highest unit that could be expressed in a term. So he's basically saying this guy owed him the maximum. I mean, there's no way to even describe how much this guy owed his master. The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. He didn't even try to make him pay it back. He just canceled it altogether. But when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. He got paid a denarius for a day's wages. So 100 denarii is basically what it takes to is the amount of money you get paid with 100 days of work. So about 3 months of work. A little more than that. He grabbed him and began to choke him. "Pay back what you owe!" he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, "Be patient with me, and I'll pay you back." Now, he could pay this back. He's in debt. He's in about a 3-month debt to this guy. It's possible for him to pay this debt back. It may take him a while, but it's possible. I'm in debt to one of my friends right now because I paid $200 for something from him. I paid $100 of that back. I got 100 more to go. I'll get it paid within another month or so. I'll pay that debt back. So this guy could pay this debt back. This other dude could not pay his debt back. But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were greatly distressed. And they went and told their master everything that had happened. And the master called in that servant. "You wicked servant," he said. "I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Should you not have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you?" In his anger, his master turned him over to the jailers to be tortured, or the torturers to be tortured, until he should pay back all he owed, which is never. You're never going to pay it back. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you, unless you forgive your brother from your heart. And you got to keep doing it. You got to keep showing mercy. Blessed are the merciful, for they'll be shown mercy. There's an example of that in practice. No matter how much debt you think someone owes to you, it pales in comparison to what you owe before God. And we're all like that. I mean, this other guy who owed the 100 denarii would have owed his master the same amount of debt. To take the parable a bit further, we all owe an unpayable debt to God. And we can never pay that debt back. So we have been shown mercy because God is willing to forgive that debt. And we therefore need to be willing to forgive others who debt. Again, that goes back to the Lord's Prayer. We talk about the Sermon on the Mount, the attitudes expressed in the Beatitudes at the beginning of that sermon. But after that, we have what we call the Lord's Prayer. Really should be called the Disciples' Prayer. And it says, wow, where is it? Well, it says, forgive us our debts, for we forgive those who trespass against us. So forgive us our debts against you, which are impossible for us to repay, as we forgive those who trespass against us, which is possible. Now, in the Old Testament, when you sinned against your brother and you cost him something tangible from your sin, you were part of the reconciliation process involved paying back what you owe plus a certain amount beyond that. That's called the restitution offering. So they had a system in place to do that, to reconcile estranged brothers in this fashion. When Jesus had finished saying these things, so that's another clue that one of our major discourses of teaching is over, because we see this before and we'll see it again, that phrase. That's one of the structural features of the book of Matthew. He left Galilee and went into the region of Judea to the other side of the Jordan. So he's getting closer to Jerusalem. He's on his way to Jerusalem. Large crowds followed him, and he healed them there. Some Pharisees came to him to test him. They asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason?" Now this is a test. Remember, this is what got John the Baptist in trouble. He was going after King Herod, not really king, but Herod, for divorcing his previous wife and marrying his brother's wife. And so they're trying to get Jesus in trouble, either to have him go against God's teaching, because John was saying it wasn't lawful for Herod to have that woman as his wife. So either Jesus is going to compromise on his teaching of God's law, or he's going to say something that's going to get him in trouble like John the Baptist did. So this is a test. "Haven't you read," he replied, "that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female, and said, 'For this reason a man will abandon his father and his mother and be glued to his wife, and the two will become one flesh'? So they are no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let man not separate." So you're not supposed to divorce at all. "Why then?" Because God has joined them together. "Why then," they asked, "did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away?" Now that goes back to Deuteronomy 24, which permits men to send away their wives. Deuteronomy 24, verse 1. "If a man marries a woman who becomes displeasing to him because he finds something indecent about her," don't know what that is, doesn't say what that is, "and he writes her a certificate of divorce, gives it to her, and sends her from his house. And if after she leaves his house she becomes the wife of another man." Now it actually goes on to say something else, but they focused on that first part of that command about writing your wife a certificate of divorce and sending her away. That was what they were concerned about. What can I do to get rid of this woman? What can I do to send her away and maybe marry a younger, more attractive woman? I'm no longer attracted to this old lady. I want someone new. Because at the time they debated this. They didn't know. What does it mean to find something indecent about your wife? Some of them were saying you could divorce your wife for any reason. That's what they were indicating here with their statement. Like, you could come up with anything indecent or unpleasing about your wife and send her away. Like, where do we draw the line? Now, they're saying this to test him. But it is a question, like, where do you draw the line? What's indecent? What are the actual legitimate grounds for divorce? So he's kind of sidestepped their question by saying, let God join these two together. Don't separate them. "Why then did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away?" Jesus replied, "Moses permitted, not commanded, permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard. But it was not this way from the beginning. So the law was written somewhat to accommodate the sinfulness in men's hearts." Part of the reason why the law is the way it is to accommodate people where they were at the time it was given. They were not ready to hear that they couldn't divorce their wives for any reason other than what Jesus is going to say here. So Moses gave them a permit to divorce their wives for things that were indecent. But it was not this way from the beginning. "I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for marital unfaithfulness, and marries another woman, commits adultery." The disciples said to him, presumably this would be after the Pharisees had left, I presume, if this is the situation between a husband and wife, it's better not to marry. Who wants to be stuck with the same woman for the rest of your life? Ew. Jesus replied, not everyone can accept this word, but only those to whom it has been given. For some are eunuchs because they were born that way. In other words, they were born with no sex drive. Others were made that way by men, and that means actual, I think, literal eunuchs who were castrated. And there would have been quite a few. Like at this point in time, that would not have been uncommon. We've read about that before, and some of the, it would not have been unusual for male slaves or captives of war to be castrated. So you would have had a not insignificant number of eunuchs in their actual, literal eunuchs in their society, far more than we would have today. And others have renounced marriage or have made themselves eunuchs because of the kingdom of heaven. And that doesn't refer to men who literally crush or cut off their own you-know-whats, but those who abstain, like Paul, like Jesus himself does, and like Paul does later, those who abstain from sexual relations or marriage for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Jesus himself did this, and Paul will do this. He'll be an example. This doesn't refer to men who have actually physically castrated themselves. So some people have no sex drive from birth. Some have it removed from them by men violently. And some take a vow of celibacy, we would call it today, for the sake of the kingdom. The one who can accept this should accept it. It's difficult teaching. It's not easy. But the one, and Paul will say much the same in 1 Corinthians 7, but the one who can accept it should. Then little children were brought to Jesus for him to place his hands on them and pray for them. But the disciples rebuked those who brought them. Jesus said, let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. Now, it goes back to what he said in the previous chapter of being like a child. Humble yourself like a child. Unless you do so, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Doesn't mean that literal children rule the kingdom of heaven. It means that those who do not humble themselves like children will not enter the kingdom of heaven. It belongs to those who have a childlike attitude, and again, go back to the Beatitudes: poor in spirit, show mercy, merciful, hunger and thirst for righteousness. When he had placed his hands on them, now little kids, of course, often don't show these characteristics. But what the point that's being made here is their dependence on their parents or adults for their survival. Little kids often have very unpleasant attitudes and behaviors. But little kids are completely dependent on adults to provide for them and give them what they need to survive. And so that's the sort of attitude that we should have, to be completely dependent on our Father to provide. And that goes back to the Sermon on the Mount, where he talks about, in Matthew 6, don't worry about your life, what you'll eat or drink, or about your body, what you'll wear. Okay, you're supposed to have that kind of attitude of complete, give us this day our daily bread. That goes back to the prayer again. Depend on your Father to take care of your needs and to give you what you need on a daily basis. Because that's what children do. Even the bad ones do that. And again, children have lots of bad. I talked about the Beatitudes just there. Well, a lot of those things are not very childlike, because children's attitudes can actually be quite rotten a lot of times. But the thing that children have is a complete dependence on adults to provide for them. And that's the sort of attitude that we should be emulating. So let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. When he had placed his hands on them, he went on from there. He is on his way to Jerusalem, and he will get there before much longer. It's March 6th, right now. Easter is in a couple of weeks. I would certainly like to get through this. I was originally hoping to get done with the Gospels entirely by this Easter, and that's certainly not going to happen. I'll be lucky to get done with the Gospels by next Christmas at the rate I'm going, but that's it for Matthew 17, 18, and the first half of 19, and we will pick up at this with the encounter with the rich young ruler in Matthew 19 next time.